For 3 years, the world had been shrinking, not all at once that would have been easier to accept. It happened the way fog rolls in off the coast, slow and quiet, until one morning you look out the window and everything familiar has disappeared. It started with small things. I forgot my neighbor's name at the block party, the woman I'd shared a fence line with for 19 years. I left the stove on twice in 1 week. I called my daughter by my sister's name at Thanksgiving dinner, and the table went quiet in that particular way that meant everyone had already been talking about it. My daughter Claire reached over and patted my hand like I was a child who had stumbled. "It's okay, Mom. It happens." But it wasn't okay, and we both knew it. My name is Dorothy Hale. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years teaching high school English in Savannah, Georgia, and I have read enough literature to know that the stories we tell about ourselves are rarely the whole truth. What happened to me over the past year is one of those stories, and I am only now ready to tell it honestly. After those early incidents, Claire arranged for me to see a specialist at the memory clinic in Atlanta. She drove me herself, which should have felt like love, and mostly did, except for the way she kept her eyes on the road and her hands too tight on the wheel. The doctor was kind, thorough, and careful. He used words like mild cognitive impairment and early-stage indicators. He said we would monitor. He said there were lifestyle adjustments. He said we should discuss what support might look like going forward. Claire took notes on her phone the entire time. On the drive home, she said very little. She asked if I was tired. She asked if I wanted to stop for coffee. She did not ask what I was feeling, and I did not tell her. I looked out the window at the Georgia pines blurring past and thought about the house I had lived in for 38 years, the one my late husband Gerald built most of with his own hands. The porch he added the summer Claire turned 5. The kitchen window he replaced twice because I never liked the angle of the light. The garden, where I still grew tomatoes every June. I thought about who that house would belong to when I was gone. The second appointment came 6 weeks later. A different doctor this time, younger, recommended by a colleague of Claire's husband, a man named Patrick, who worked in finance and had opinions about everything. This doctor ran additional tests. He spoke to Claire privately for several minutes, while I sat in a paper-backed gown and looked at a framed print of Savannah's waterfront on the wall, a print so generic it could have been purchased anywhere. The word he used was progression. Claire nodded. She asked about power of attorney. She asked about care facilities versus in-home support. She asked whether it was premature to begin thinking about asset management, so that I wouldn't be, and I am quoting here, burdened with decisions I'm not equipped to handle. I was sitting 4 feet away. I am a woman who spent 3 decades teaching 17-year-olds to read carefully, to question what is said and what is left unsaid, to understand that language is never accidental. I heard every word. What Claire did not know, what no one knew yet, was that 3 weeks earlier I had driven myself to see a private neurologist in Charleston, a woman named Dr. Elaine Marsh, who had been recommended not by anyone in Claire's circle, but by my oldest friend Ruth, who had worked in hospital administration for decades and knew the difference between a good doctor and a convenient one. Dr. Marsh spent 4 hours with me. She reviewed every test, ran several of her own, and sat across from me in her office with none of the careful softness I had come to dread. "What you've been experiencing," she told me, "is consistent with severe, prolonged stress, combined with disrupted sleep and the early stages of grief. Your husband passed 14 months ago. You retired 8 months ago. You have had no consistent community, no creative outlet, and no one asking how you are actually doing. Your brain is not deteriorating, Dorothy. It is exhausted and underused." I sat with that for a moment. She told me about a program: cognitive enrichment, social engagement, structured creative work. She said with the right support, the symptoms I had been experiencing were largely reversible. She said I was not losing my mind. She said I had simply been very, very alone. I drove home along the coast road with the windows down. The salt air came in sharp and clean, and somewhere outside Beaufort I pulled over and cried for about 10 minutes. Not out of sadness exactly. More like the feeling of setting down something very heavy that you have been carrying so long you forgot it had weight. Then, I made a decision. I would not tell Claire. Not yet. Not until I understood what she had already decided about me. Our housekeeper, Vera, was the only one I told. She had been with our family for 11 years. She was the one who noticed when I hadn't eaten, who left chamomile on the nightstand without being asked, who never once spoke to me in that softened, slowed-down voice that had become everyone else's default. When I told her what Dr. Marsh had said, she pressed her hand over her heart and closed her eyes. "Thank God," she said. I told her it had to stay between us. She looked at me steadily. "Whatever you need, Miss Dorothy. You just tell me what to do." 2 days later, Claire called to say she and Patrick were coming for the weekend. "Just to check in," she said, "to help me get organized." Patrick had some thoughts he wanted to share about the financial side of things. I told her that sounded fine. I told Vera to make up the guest room and to prepare Sunday dinner the way we always did, the roast chicken with rosemary potatoes and the lemon pound cake Patrick always had 2 slices of. I wanted everything to feel normal. I wanted them comfortable. They arrived Saturday afternoon. Patrick carried in a briefcase along with his weekend bag, which told me more than anything else about the nature of this visit. Claire hugged me at the door with both arms, the real kind of hug, and for a moment I let myself simply be her mother. "You look good, Mom," she said, studying my face with something I couldn't quite name. Vera had made sweet tea and put out a cheese board. We sat on the back porch in the late September light, and the conversation moved the way those conversations do, lightly over surfaces, careful not to press too hard. Claire asked about my garden. Patrick talked about a deal his firm had recently closed. I asked about the children, my 2 grandchildren who were 10 and 7, and whom I had not seen since Gerald's funeral. "We've been meaning to bring them," Claire said, and I nodded. After supper, I excused myself to get ready for bed. My bedroom is at the end of the hall, past the sitting room, with the old pocket doors that Gerald installed the year we turned 40 and decided the house needed character. Those doors don't quite seal. They never have. Gerald always meant to fix them and never got around to it, and after he was gone I found I didn't want them fixed. Small imperfections are their own kind of memory. I sat in the chair by the window, with the lamp off, and listened. Claire's voice first. "She seemed okay today, right? Better than last time." Patrick. "She seemed like herself, which honestly makes it harder. You almost forget until something happens." Claire. "Dr. Alderman said the window for proactive planning is now. If we wait until there's a real incident, everything gets complicated. The courts get involved." Patrick. "I've talked to someone at the firm. There's a way to structure the transfer that looks like estate planning. Completely normal for someone her age. The house, the investment accounts. We'd hold them in trust, technically. Nothing changes for her day-to-day." Claire, quieter now. "She loves that house." Patrick. "She won't be able to stay there indefinitely. You know that. And if we wait, we lose control of the timeline. There are carrying costs, the property taxes alone." Claire. "I know." A pause. Then, "She'd want this to be taken care of. She always said she didn't want to be a burden." I sat very still in the dark. Outside, a mockingbird was doing what mockingbirds do in Savannah in September, cycling through every borrowed song it had collected over the summer. I had always loved that about them, the way they held on to everything they'd ever heard. I thought about Gerald. I thought about the summer he poured the concrete for the front walk himself, coming inside each evening with his hands raw and his back aching, refusing to hire it out because he said this was the house we were going to grow old in, and he wanted to put his hands into every part of it. I thought about the way he used to read on that porch in the early mornings before the heat came up, and how I would bring him coffee, and he would look up at me with that uncomplicated expression that I have been chasing the memory of ever since. I thought about my daughter, who I had nursed through fevers and nightmares and a broken engagement at 24 and a difficult first pregnancy, who I had driven to swim practice at 5:30 in the morning for 4 years and never once complained about it, not to her face. I thought about the word burden and who had really said it first. The next morning at breakfast, Patrick set the briefcase on the kitchen table before we'd even finished our coffee. He and Claire sat across from me with the particular stillness of people who have rehearsed. Claire had a folder. Patrick had a legal pad. "We wanted to talk to you about some practical things," Claire began. "Just to make sure everything is in order. For your peace of mind." I looked at the briefcase. I looked at my daughter's hands, folded on top of the folder. I looked out the kitchen window at Gerald's garden, which I had kept up myself all through this past year, every bit of it. Then I set down my coffee cup and said, clearly and without any tremor in my voice, "I know what this is about, Claire. And there are some things I need to tell you first." The color shifted in her face. "3 weeks ago," I said, "I saw a specialist in Charleston, not the one you and Patrick arranged, my own. Her name is Dr. Elaine Marsh, and she has no connection to anyone in Patrick's network. She spent 4 hours evaluating me. I have her full report in my desk drawer." I stood up, went to the study, and came back with the report and a second envelope. I set them both on the table. "The diagnosis from Dr. Marsh is stress and grief-related cognitive fatigue. Not dementia, not progression, exhaustion. Which is not surprising, given that I lost my husband 14 months ago and no one has asked me how I'm doing since the casserole stopped coming." Claire's mouth opened. Patrick's legal pad was suddenly very still. I opened the second envelope. "This is a letter from Warren Tillman at Tillman and Associates in Savannah. He has been our family attorney since 1987, and I called him 10 days ago. I have updated my will, my power of attorney, and my advance directive. The power of attorney goes to Ruth Calloway. The estate, in the event of my death, is structured as follows. The house and its contents go into a trust to be maintained as a residency program for early career teachers through the school district I retired from. Gerald would have liked that. The financial accounts are divided, with a portion to you and the children, and a significant portion to Vera, who has spent 11 years taking care of this family and deserves to retire somewhere she chooses." Patrick made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Claire said, "Mom." I looked at her. Not with anger. I had moved through the anger over the past 10 days and come out the other side into something quieter and more certain. I looked at her the way you look at someone you have known so long and so completely that their worst moments don't erase the rest of them. They just become part of the whole complicated truth. "I heard you last night," I said. "Both of you. The pocket doors have never sealed properly, and I have lived in this house for 38 years. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had heard in a long time. Claire's eyes filled, and she pressed her fingers against her mouth. She was not performing. I know my daughter well enough to know the difference. Whatever else was true about this weekend, the grief on her face in that moment was real. "Mom," she said, "I'm so sorry. I thought." "I know what you thought," I said. "You thought the diagnosis was settled. You thought you were managing a situation. I understand how it happened. I also understand that understanding how something happened is not the same as excusing it." Patrick started to say something about intentions, and I held up one hand. He stopped. "Claire," I said, "I'm not cutting you out of my life. You are my daughter and I love you, and I will love you until I don't have breath left to do it with. But I will not be managed. I will not be moved out of this house, or out of my own finances, or out of my own story while I am standing here perfectly capable of writing it myself." She nodded. Tears were running down her face by now, and she wasn't trying to stop them. Patrick quietly closed his legal pad. After a while, I asked Vera to bring more coffee. She came in with the pot and a plate of the butter cookies she kept in the tin above the refrigerator and set them down without a word, though she caught my eye as she turned to leave, and something passed between us that I won't try to name. We sat there for a long time, the three of us. It was not comfortable. It was not resolved. But it was honest, which is rarer and worth more. Patrick left that afternoon. Claire stayed until Monday morning. We did not talk about the briefcase again. We sat on the porch Sunday evening and watched the light go out of the sky over Gerald's garden, and at some point she reached over and took my hand and held it, and I let her. Before she left, she stood in the front doorway with her bag over her shoulder and looked at me in a way she hadn't in years. Since before the diagnosis, since before Gerald, Since some earlier version of our lives when things between us were easier. I should have asked, she said. How you were doing. I should have asked more. Yes, I said. You should have. She nodded. Can I still call you? Every day, I said. But call me to talk, not to check in. The days after that were mine, in a way they hadn't been for a long time. I started going to a writing group at the library on Tuesday mornings, something I had been meaning to do since retirement, and kept postponing. I started sleeping through the night again, which Dr. Marsh had said would come, and she was right. I started spending my mornings in the garden before the heat came up, the way Gerald used to, and I began to understand what he had loved about those hours. The quality of the light, the way the world had not yet decided what kind of day it was going to be. Vera started talking about a cousin in Florida she'd been meaning to visit. I told her she should go. She told me she wasn't going anywhere until she was sure I was all right. I told her I had never been more all right in my life. She looked at me with the particular skepticism of a woman who has known you long enough to fact-check your optimism. Then she told me she'd think about it. 4 months later, I got a card in the mail from Claire. Inside was a photograph of my 2 grandchildren standing in front of a chalkboard in what I recognized as Claire's kitchen. They had written, in unsteady, enormous letters, "We're coming to Grandma's for Thanksgiving." I put the photograph on the refrigerator, next to the one of Gerald on the porch the last good summer we had together. I thought about what it meant to be known by the people you love, and how rarely it happens without cost, and how worth it the cost can be. I had not lost my mind. I had simply been waiting, all that long, quiet year, for someone to remember I still had one, that someone turned out to be me.